Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on geopolitics to look at the secret rules that, really shape our world. All of this is based on the work of a strategist named Pedro Banos. So let's just jump right in with a pretty provocative question, one that's inspired by our source material today, Pedro Banos' book, How the World is Ruled. The book throws out this really challenging idea. What if all that chaos we see in global affairs isn't actually chaotic at all? So, in this explainer, we're going to break down the book's main argument, that there's this secret rule book for how nations fight for power, and it's all happening just under the surface of the daily news. And really, it all kicks off with this one core idea, something that's almost biological. Okay, so to really get these strategies, you first have to understand the book's big foundational concept. And that is thinking about a country, a state, not just as a spot on a map, but as a living, breathing organism. This idea, it's pretty much the engine that drives everything else we're going to talk about. Think about it. Just like any living thing, a country's main impulse is to survive, right? And to grow. And that means it needs to get more territory, more resources, more influence. The book basically argues that this fundamental drive, this need to survive and expand, is the why behind almost every single major move on the world stage. And yeah, as this quote from Galawa lays out, this is not a new concept. The war for space is basically the story of humanity. It's this never-ending struggle for room, for stuff, for power. So, okay, if a country is hardwired to expand, what's the best way to pull that off today? Well, the book's answer is pretty surprising. It's not necessarily with armies, it's with something way more fundamental. And that brings us to the first major strategy. The book is pretty blunt about this. The most powerful strategy of all is economic control. It basically says, if you really want to know why countries go to war, don't just look at the flags and the speeches, you have to follow the money. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, because the book takes historical events we all think we know and just reframes them. For example, the Spanish Civil War. We're taught it was this big ideological struggle against fascism. But the book points out that the American company Texaco was supplying oil to Franco's forces, supposedly to lock down a petrol monopoly after the war. Or look at the 1953 coup in Iran. The common story is it was all about stopping communism, a Cold War thing. But it happened right after Iran's leader nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which was, you guessed it, British-controlled. And this isn't just ancient history. The book brings it right up to the present day. It actually cites former President Trump, who talked about how a key reason for the U.S. to stay in Afghanistan could be to extract its mineral deposits. We're talking over $1 trillion worth of stuff like lithium and copper. It's a pretty stark example of the resources that are really on the table. So, the big point here is that behind all the headlines about ideology or religion or politics, there's very often a brutal, hidden fight for resources. But what if you could win that fight without ever firing a single bullet? And that leads us to the next strategy. This one isn't about conquering territory, it's about conquering the mind. It's all about shaping what people believe, because if you can do that, you can control what they do. The old Sun Tzu quote nails it perfectly. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. And that idea is really the foundation of all modern information warfare. The book argues that the real ultimate power isn't rolling tanks into a city. It's capturing the minds of the people who live there with a compelling story. And here's the playbook for how it's done, which the book attributes to Goebbels' principles of propaganda. It's a 3-step process. Step 1, simplification. You boil every complex problem down to one single, easy-to-hate enemy. Step 2, transposition. You take all of your own mistakes, your own failures, and you blame them on that enemy. And step 3, unanimity. You create this illusion that everyone agrees with you, which makes anyone who dissents feel totally alone and wrong. It's an incredibly powerful formula for hijacking the public conversation. So the next logical question is, who's actually controlling this narrative? Well, according to the book, a surprisingly small number of companies, mostly based in the US and Europe, pretty much dominate the entire global flow of information. And that really makes you wonder, right? Are we actually getting a diverse range of viewpoints, or are we just hearing one side of the story over and over again? And I mean, this quote here is just chilling. It's from Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg trials, and he just lays it all out. He says that dragging people along is simple. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked. Fear. It's the ultimate tool for manufacturing consent. If you can convince people they're in danger, They will follow you absolutely anywhere. Okay, so once you've got control of the story and you've stoked that fear, the next step is to actually do something. But here's the twist. According to the book, the smartest global powers, they don't act directly. They've learned how to rule from the shadows, how to get what they want without leaving any fingerprints behind. This gets to the whole concept of leading from behind. Think about it. A full-on invasion, it's incredibly expensive, it's super risky, and the political fallout can be a nightmare. But funding a local group to do your dirty work, arming an insurgency, now that gives you plausible deniability. You can deny you were ever involved, all while getting exactly what you wanted. And this slide basically lays out the whole toolkit for this kind of indirect rule. We're talking funding and arming insurgents, using other countries, proxy states, to fight your battles for you, even drawing borders on a map in a way that's guaranteed to create conflict down the line. It's all about manipulating events from a safe distance, making it almost impossible to prove who was really pulling the strings. And make no mistake, this is not some new 21st century thing. The book uses the long, complicated history of U.S. actions in Cuba as a perfect case study. It shows a consistent pattern going back over 200 years of supporting internal opposition groups to shape events in Cuba and achieve U.S. foreign policy goals. And it's not always about funding people. Sometimes it's about literally engineering conflict into the landscape. A perfect and tragic example is the Durand Line. Back in 1893, a British diplomat just drew a line on a map, but that one line split the Pashtun people in two, creating a permanent source of instability and conflict between Afghanistan and what was then British India, a conflict that could then be exploited for decades, even centuries. So when you pull it all together, what you're left with are these three interconnected pillars of global power, as the book sees it. First, economic control. You control the money and the resources. Second, mental domination. You control the story that people believe. And third, indirect action. You control the conflict, but you do it from the shadows. So what's the central thesis here? What's the main takeaway? It's that geopolitics is a ruthless game, played with a hidden rulebook. And it's all driven by this relentless, unstoppable hunt for power and resources. It's a pretty cynical view, for sure, but it really forces you to look past the official reasons we're given for why things happen. Really, the whole point of this explainer was to give you a different lens, a new framework to analyze what's going on in the world. So we'll leave you with a question to think about. The next time you're watching the news and some major global event is unfolding, just ask yourself, who's following the money here? Who's trying to control the narrative? And who, just maybe, is leaving from behind?